So welcome. I'm really glad you're all here to learn something about remote pair programming. And it's my first time in Chicago. I really like it. Are you from Chicago, people? Yeah, so I'm especially amazed by how big the buildings are. But yeah, I'm from the Netherlands, so we don't have really that big of a buildings. Okay, so let's start. But before we start, we do a little game. It's called Bingo. I think everyone knows Bingo. But this time, it's the remote pair programming version. You see all kinds of codes that I've heard during a pair programming session using screen sharing. So a tool like Skype or Zoom or Teams, whatever. And then these are things that I hear all the time. I think the default question is, can you see my screen nowadays? But also scroll down, scroll up, zoom a bit to know where the other one is going. Are things you heard all the time. So I want you to ask, check out these codes and see if you also recognize them. If you have any row of 3, you have a bingo. So 3, 2, 1 are the bingos? Okay, so I didn't tell you, but the one with the bingo, they win a Dutch cookie, like a waffle cookie. So come afterwards to get your prize. So the good thing is, we have better tools to do pair programming online, not using screen sharing. So we'll dive into that today. First of all, I'm Weers. I live in the Netherlands. I work at Ardina, it's a consultancy company, and I have an assignment at the National Police. And I put in the Duke because it's a Duke and I like to ride a motorbike, so I really love this image. So, but before we dive into those tools, I was curious, do we really need another human, another colleague to do pair programming? Because we have all this cool AI stuff. Do we really need that? Or can we use a computer or a robot or something else to do pair programming together? So maybe some of you have heard of GitHub Copilot. Who has heard of it? Okay, not so many, then I'll explain it. So Copilot is a tool you can use inside your IDE, a plugin, and it uses AI to understand what you're doing and help you with programming. So it will learn from all the public repositories it has on GitHub, and then learn how to code in which situation, and it will help you to generate code and code with you. So I put a really small example in here. And what you see in gray is the suggestions from GitHub Copilot. So now you think it already says, oh, maybe you want a name. Okay, maybe you want this method, and I already give you the answer, which is, of course, Java. I have to be fair, I did also get Weers programming language. It's also Java. So I think it will just look at what kind of language you're using. So of course, this is really, really easy. We believe that AI can do this. But there are tons of examples of really complex stuff where they give a really valid solution for your problem. But still, you have to be careful using it, or at least think for yourself. It's kind of with Stack Overflow. You can go there for solutions, but please don't copy everything without thinking. It's the same for GitHub Copilot, because it's using the other repository. And you don't know for sure that what it's learned, it's really a valid way of programming. But yeah, that said, I think it's really cool what it can do. So try it out. Unfortunately, it's not completely free anymore, so you can only have a certain amount. But it's nice to play with, and there are some alternatives. But yeah, we'll come back to it later if it's a valid alternative with human pair programming. So when people don't do pair programming, they often think it's time-consuming. There were 2 people working on one problem instead of working separately. How could that be efficient? Why would you do it? Especially some managers can say, okay, but I just want you to work on separate stories. That goes faster. Don't do it with the 2 of you, do it on your own. So I completely disagree with this. Pair programming learns you a lot. You learn from the other colleague about what different programming styles are, different solutions, different features, but you also learn a lot about the code. Because I see a lot of people are working in a specific part of the code base that they know best, and this helps you to see different parts of the code base and working with each other. So you will learn a lot, and in the end, that will speed you up, because it's easier to find a bug, it's easier to solve it, or maybe you even have less bugs because you already looked at the problem with 2 people at the same time and have different thoughts about you. So I think that's why it's really valuable to do. And nowadays people use, if they're not in the office, they use screen sharing if they want to do it. And besides some downsides we already saw in the bingo, for me the biggest downside using screen sharing is the lack of interaction. Most of the time you will see that the person sharing their code will explain and go through the code, and the other person is just listening and maybe asking a question. It doesn't really feel like collaborating and doesn't really feel like the other person is also coding. So luckily there are a lot of tools who are better in this, and also it prevents smaller downsides, like I work on a big monitor when I'm at home, but I have a colleague and he's working on a small screen of his laptop. So if I share my IDE, I have to zoom in or use presentation modes, which is really annoying. And sometimes if someone has like a bad internet connection, it gets too slow. So luckily there are tools, and that's what we will look at today. So we will follow the tour, the remote pair programming, and it's about 4 themes or tools that you can use inside your IDE. So as a Java developer, I wanted to use things in Java, but also I use IntelliJ. I want to be usable for IntelliJ. So all the themes you will see for that have it. So if you're using Visual Studio Code and all your colleagues are, then you can also use Live Share, but I didn't include it because I want to use IntelliJ. So we have 5 stages, and the stages are about different aspects of the tool, and we're going to look into it, which one is better to use. And in the end, we have 1 winner, but we also have 2 jerseys to give away. So a jersey is about a specific use case that that tool is really good at. So let's start at looking at the themes. First, we have theme Code Together. Code Together is an IDE plugin, and you can use it for Visual Studio Code, the JetBrains IDEs, and Eclipse. And as you see, this is how it looks like. So if you're the host, so the person who wants to share their code, you go to the Code Together tab, and you say, I want to start a session. That generates a URL, and with that URL you can ask people to join. They can join from within their own IDE, if that's supported, or they can use the browser. So if you, like you see in here, this is how the participant sees it, so the one who's joining. So it looks like you're regular coding, but then you'll see things like the code is marked, or you see changes from someone else, because you're working in the project of the host, but then with more people at the same time. There's some more features, but we'll come back to that later. Duckly. Duckly can be used inside JetBrains IDEs and Visual Studio Code, and you can also use this in the browser. So it works similar. You have the Duckly tab from the plugin, and as a host you can start a session. You give the URL to participants and they can join. What looks a bit different, and we'll dive into it later, but you can already see it. What you see here is the project structure from your own project. So as a participant, there's where I see the project I was working in. It's not opening a new tab. Over here, you see the file structure from the project of the host. And so that means that you can have files opened from both your own code and the code of the host. Then we have Code With Me. Code With Me is developed by JetBrains, and it's only usable for their IDEs. And to start this one, you go to the icon of the 2 persons, and it's generating a URL. You give that to the participants, and they are then asked to download the IntelliJ client. It's a lightweight version of IntelliJ, and it's coupled to the code of the host. So even if you're working in IntelliJ, you're not using your regular IntelliJ, you use that client, which is always automatically downloaded, and every new session, it just generates the connection again. What you see here is the view of the participant in the client. So for the people who are familiar with IntelliJ, it really looks the same and it feels the same. It has just some slight less functionality that you probably won't need if you're in the pair programming session. As you see, it also has the video calling included. The other tools have that too, but we'll get to that later. And our last theme is GitLive. GitLive is slightly different from the rest because it's not purely focused on pair programming. It's meant for all-day collaboration with other developers, and a part of it is the pair programming. Again, it has a tab, like you see it here below, and you'll see that it has, if you can read it, but I will tell you, there are two users, Kaya Weers and Kaya Test. And it means that all the people are working on the same project of you, collaborators, they have access to that repository, and they have Git Live. You will see them there, and you can see, for example, what changes they make. And changes are not like the push changes, but also there are non-committed changes on different branches. So what this is really helpful for is, for example, big projects. I'm working at the police, and we have 14 development Scrum teams working on one repository. As you can imagine, we have sometimes some problems with word conflicts and knowing what other people are doing. And something like this can help you at least notice that people are working in a similar part, and you can contact them if you have conflicting things or that you might not want to do it double again. So that's what it will show you all day. And then you can ask someone to do a pair programming session. You will just click on their name and invite them. Also, Git Live has the same as Duckly, that you don't move to a separate window, but you're staying in the same project. And we'll get to that later, but you can see it here that we have demo application.java and then again demo application.java, but one is from the participant's own branch and own project, and the other one is from the host. So to make sure to point out that Git Live is only usable with people who have access to the repository. So all the other tools are usable with whoever you want. You can give them the URL and they will join. This is only usable for people who have access to your repository, to your colleagues. So it makes it really safe because you know for sure that they should be able to see the code. But it is a downside if you want to work with people outside of your project. So let's go to the stages. First, we'll look at the coding environment. This is the coding environment of the participant. The host is always working in their own IDE, as long as that's supported. Access to the session, we'll dive into how you get into the session and if there are any options to limit the access. Then we look at the pair programming options, so the most important part, the usability, and last we will shortly look at security. Let's start with our first stage about the coding environment. So I said the host is working on their own IDE if it's supported. For the others, it differs. So in Code Together, as I explained, you have 3 options for your IDEs, but you can also use the browser to join, or to join. In Duckly, you have 2 options for the IDEs. Eclipse is not supported, and you can also use the browser. So in Git Live, you don't have the browser options, and you have, again, 2 IDEs. And in Code with Me, you can only use that client from IntelliJ. So as a participant, you don't have to have anything because you're automatically downloaded client. But as a host, you need to have an IntelliJ version on your machine. It doesn't matter if you use the community edition or the paid version. It only matters in case of things like duration of the session, but we'll come to that later. Let's see in here. So you can join from your own IDE except for Code with Me. The number of IDEs that is supported differs, and the browser options is only offered by Code Together and Duckly. So in here, we'll see that Code Together won this stage because it has the most options for IDEs, and you can also use the browser, which is convenient if someone has a different IDE or they're just in a place where they don't have their whole IDEs installed and they just want to join from a different laptop, for example. So what will that do? Pam, pam, pam. So now the yellow by Code Together is still first, but we have 4 more stages to go. Access to the session. So I already explained a little bit, but to get into the session, most of the tools use a URL. With Code Together, you can generate a URL, but also you can create a team. It's only available in the paid version, and if you create a team, you invite people, and those people you can always then later on invite from within your IDE. So you don't have to give them a URL, you can just say, I'm starting a session, do you want to join? Then in case of Duckly, it's similar. So you can use the URL, or you can start a team, which is in the free version. But the downside of Duckly is that instead of you asking people to join, people can see that you have a session open and they can always just get into that session. And it sounds great because it's good that if teammates see a session and they just think, oh, I'm interested, I want to join. But the downside is it doesn't work per project, it works per team. So if I'm using the same IDE for a private project and I want to do pair programming there, all the teammates from maybe my work repository can also join always. So I wouldn't advise to do that, but just use the URL. GitLive works differently because people are already on the same repository, and you just invite someone and they click accept if they want to join or not accept it. And then Code.me works with the URL, and that's the only option you have to join. So that's how you know there is a session. But as I explained, if you put the URL, for example, on the internet, anyone can join, except for GitLive. So I don't think that's always good because your code might be a bit sensitive to show for everyone. So that's why Code Together and Code.me both have the option to validate that the person joining is the person you want to join. So you can verify a key, for example, to know, okay, for sure, you are the person I know I want you to get in this session. And Code.me has the option to, even though you accepted someone, kick someone out. Yeah. Of course. If
you want to work for GitLive, if you want to have like a work on across the repository, so do you have to create like a separate session for each repository or to do the same session?
Yeah, so no, in GitLive you need it per repository because it opens that window, and in there because it has to know that the person you're inviting has access, is a collaborator on that project. So you have to see it in that window, and then if you want another session, you have to, in that repository, start a session.
You mentioned that it is repository specific, right?
Yeah.
So if you want to work on like multiple repositories in the same session, does it allow?
No, you have to
create a separate session.
Yeah, because the session is really running within that window of your, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So that's how you join in there. Oh, yeah, no, know what I was talking. That you could kick someone out. So now that people are in the session, are there also options to limit the access? Because maybe you want people not to be able to do everything security-wise. So in Code.me, as you see here, these are the settings you have. So you can, for example, choose if people are allowed to edit or not. And you can create a certain file where you put in files you want to hide for the session. So if they're not allowed to see some configuration, for example. So in Duckly, the only option you have is to choose to share the whole project, a part of it, a folder, or just one file. So that's all the options you have to limit the access. GitLive has no options at all. But it does make sense, because people already have access to the repository, they are a collaborator, why would you hide certain files for them? And then Code.me has the most options. You can choose if they're allowed to edit the files, the terminal, debugging, and you can specify really easily that certain files should be hidden. So there you have the most options to make sure people are not allowed to see everything. So in short, you have different ways of logging in. Except for Duckly, all the sessions have something that you validate. The other one, accept the other one, or in GitLive, it's the other way around. And the settings of the access are the best in Code.me. And GitLive has no settings, but it does make sense. So that's why, even though Code.me has the most green ones, GitLive and Code.me finish at exactly the same time. Because for GitLive, it doesn't make sense to have all those settings. And it's already really secure, because you know that people should have access to the session. And in case with Code.me, you're more flexible, because you can invite people outside of the project. Let's see what it does. It's getting closer, but Code Together is still first. So now the most important stage. What can you do during such a session? So for all the tools, they have two options during the pair programming. You can either work together, like it will be in the office, sitting next to each other behind one laptop, one person at a time can make changes, and you're looking at the same file. Or you can work separate from the host. So work in different files, make changes on your own at the same time that someone else is making changes in a different file. So that are the two ways you have during the session, and all of the tools support it, but just in a different way, and the one more extensive than the other one. So let's start with Code Together. In Code Together, they call it cursors, virtual cursors. And if you're sharing a cursor, then you're working together in like one file, and one person at a time makes the changes. And if you have your separate cursor, then you can just work on your own in a file. And I think they're both valid ways of doing it. I would advise not to go to work separately too much, because then you lose the whole added value of pair programming. Because if anyone is just working on their own and then say, yeah, I fixed it, by the way, what's the added value? But it can be really helpful that, for example, if you're more people looking at the file and you just want to check something really quick for yourself, then you don't have to bother moving away. But let's get back to Go Together. So that's how the cursors work with different people sharing or not sharing. But then if you share the cursor, there are still two ways to do that. So they have strict pair programming and dynamically. So what they mean is that if you do pair programming, for example, in the office, you have one driver, the person who holds the keyboard and the mouse, and the other one who's not driving. And in the office, you would just switch chairs, and then someone else is the driver. So how do you want to do that online? If you use a strict version, you have to really hand over that role. So you say, okay, now you're the driver, and the person is the driver until you switch the roles again. If you choose to do it dynamically, Code Together will find out for you who is probably the driver at that moment. And it means because even if I'm following someone, I can look at another file. But as soon as I don't do anything, I will go back to the driver. And if you do it dynamically, it will look, okay, that person is moving through files a lot and trying to make changes. The other one is not moving around for a while now. Let's switch to the other one. And I think they did it quite great that it's not every change you will switch, but after a while it will switch. So I think they did a great job doing that. Okay, let's move to Duckly. In Duckly, it's less sophisticated, so you just have to follow or unfollow. If you follow someone, you will move everywhere that person goes and make changes. If you don't follow, you work on your own. And you see here again what I told you about the shared files. So you're working on the two parts at the same time. And GitLive has that too. But the downside is they don't give you the separate folder structure of the host. So as a participant in GitLive, I only see the files that are opened by the host, because then they will pop up and I can go to the different files. But as soon as I close them, I have to wait until the host opens that file to see it again. I cannot go by myself to a file that's not opened yet by the host. So I think that's not that convenient. And GitLive also only has the follow and unfollow option. So either you work together or you're not following at all. Then Code.me has some more options. So you can choose to jump to someone. So jump is like a short follow. You will just once go to where the person is, but not following around. You can follow, which is just a complete follow, or you can do the full sync mode. And the full sync mode is, it looks like dynamically pair programming in a Code Together, where it switches all the time from the driver, but then without the added intelligence to do it only once in a while if the person is doing a lot of changes. So if you do the full sync mode, every change will switch you to the other person. So you have to make some agreements with each other, because it's really annoying, because I tried with 2 laptops. If I do like this, it will switch constantly. So yeah, you have to be a bit polite and not make the changes all the time, because then it's annoying. Okay, let's look at here. So we talked all this time about the different options from the first column parallel with the host. So yeah, it's possible, just in different forms. And just Code Together and Code With Me have more options than the other tools. And then is it possible for the participant to run the test, for example, of the application. And with running, it means more like starting it. Because in the end, the application and the test, they will run on the machine of the host, on the laptop of the host. And it does make sense, because otherwise you would also want to make sure that the participant has everything installed that's on the machine of the host. You need to have the same dependencies and the same versions. Everything should be working. So it does make sense to have it running on the host machine. So for Duckly and Git Live, it's just not possible to start that. It will just, the host has to do it. And for the other tools, it is possible. And then it only makes sense if you can see something, right? If you only start it and everything will run there, you don't have the added benefit of it. So you want to see logging, for example. So Code Together, you can see most of the things, but in case of running test, you only see the test outcome, like if it succeeded, and not all the things in between. And in Code With Me, you will just see everything the host sees. And that's what Code With Me did really great, because they also added debugging together. And I think that's really valuable, because if you do a pair programming session, part of the time will be because you have a problem you can't figure out, or because you have failing tests you can't repair. And then it really makes sense to do debugging together. Everyone can put the breakpoints, and it will use all of them. Everyone can see all the details you have in a debugging session, go through it. You just have all the same options, but then they're all mixed together and influence each other. And I think it's a really great option that they have that. And last in this one is about port sharing. So maybe as a Java developer, you will mostly use your IDE and just your logging and output. But maybe if you want to see a front end, you don't only want to work inside your IDE. You also want to work together in the browser. But it's not possible to use something else than just the IDE in those tools. So they created port sharing. If you start your application locally, you can share that port and it will tunnel to the other one, and then they can use that one to visit the locally running application or website or whatever. So I think that's convenient if you want to use it. So I think it's already quite clear, but Code With Me won this stage. I think their debugging is really excellent, and also the other options are extensive and like really easy to work with. So it's getting closer to Code Together now, and they're both first. Usability. So look at how easy is it to use the tools, but mostly do they have any extras and options you have? So the first thing I checked was code completion, because if it's not working, then I doubt that a lot of people want to use it. So luckily, the code completion is working on all of the tools. And then the refactoring. So for example, can I do a rename or introduce a variable, something like that? And that differs, and also the way how they solve it. Sometimes some tools do the processing on the part of the host and the other one of the part of the participant. Doesn't always work perfectly. So Code Together, it works well, but they don't have too many options. So for example, they do have the rename and the copy of a file, but that's about it. Then for Duckly and Git Live, they offer all the options you normally have. But there's a downside. So you cannot use, or the options, the refactoring will only happen within the file you're in. So for example, if you do a rename from a local variable, it works just fine, because it will change everything in the file. But as soon as you change a class name, for example, it only changes there and it doesn't change the class. Or if you change a method, it will only change the method in that file and not the point where it's being used or where it's declared. So that's really annoying, and you should be aware of that if you're using it, because it will get a mess if only half of the things are renamed. And then Code With Me is somewhere in between. So they offer quite some options, but not all of them. But the ones they offer, like rename, is working properly and everything is changed with it. So then as you see with Code With Me, the tools offer video calling. It's added later on after maybe a year or so. And in the beginning I was doubting why would you want it. So I prefer to just use the regular video calling tool you already have, because often you're already in the call and you just say, okay, let's go pair programming. But if you want to, you can use it within those tools. In Code With Me, as you see here, it's within your IDE, but the other tools have it in the browser. And I think it's just a matter of preference what you would like. So I personally don't like seeing someone inside my IDE, because it takes space, and well, to want to see that constantly, prefer to have it on a separate window. So I just don't use it, but you can if you want to. And then Git Live, because as I mentioned, Git Live is not primarily focused on pair programming. It's more all-day collaboration. So we saw that you could see whatever changes is someone making. And I'm not sure if you can see it, but below in the sidebar, there's a really small icon with a yellow dot, and it's the icon from someone else. So if you're working and you see a lot of those icons in the sidebar, oh, I was thinking you had a question. Then you know that someone made a change there, and it's helpful to just see if that's affecting your change. But for me, what's also really cool is you have the red box here, and it means that if you're going to commit the code like you have it and someone else is too, you will have a merge conflict. So it already warns you upfront that there is going to be a merge conflict. In this case, it's a really stupid one because I changed the main method to different names, to new name and what's the other one? Main method. So yeah, that will be giving a conflict in the end. Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And also Git Live has integration with tools like Slack and Jira, so it's really for to connect everything and to mostly keep aware of what others are doing. And I think it's helpful if people keep working from home to have different ways to hear things you would normally see once someone is working in the office and says something. So we discussed the first columns about code completion, refactoring, video calling. And the last two have two different numbers per tool. So the first one is the amount you have in the free version, and the other one is in the paid version. Because in the last years, they all developed from being like just some test application to grow, and now they all have the paid version and the free version. So for me, the good thing about this is that most of the tool, they didn't downsize the amount of functionality in the free version. They just give you less options in case of duration and number of guests. So I think that's a good thing. And the duration will go from 30 minutes for Code With Me till 60 in the free version. And if you want it longer, you can have nearly all day. And the number of guests also differs a lot. In the free version, you have 1, 2, 3. And then you have a lot of guests in the paid version. Like, I have no clue why you would have 60 participants in a pair programming session. But yeah, if you want to, you can. Maybe if you would not allow them to make changes and it's just for having a big presentation and you want people to actively go around in the code, then it would be helpful. So as you see, Git Live has a lot of the green ticks, but also I think the all-day collaboration is really valid. And that's why, yeah.
Is the session duration per day or is it one session?
No, one set. So that's a good question. You're asking, is the session duration per day? But it's just per session. Because I tried, like, it says, okay, end the session. I was like, okay, click, and I started a new session. So it's not that big of a problem. Yeah. And also, I'm not sure for Code With Me, if you already have the ultimate version, so you have the license for the paid IntelliJ, then this is already included. So you don't need to have a new license for Code With Me. So Git Live won this stage because they have all the extra collaboration things and they also have the base options. Only for me, it doesn't work that well with having your two projects in one window. I would prefer to have it in a separate window because now it's confusing to have the files and not be able to go around to host the files by yourself. Let's see what it does. So now Git Live and Code with Me are together first. We go to our last stage, which is about security. So we'll only look at the basics of it, but it is important to realize that because your code needs to be analyzed and sent to someone else, it goes mostly over the servers of that tool. And then you want the code to be encrypted. So except for Git Live, those tools all offer that. But still, for example, I work at the police and I've also worked at a big bank. They prefer to have their code within their own firewalls and on their own servers and not going outside, not going anything around cloud, because that's really scary. So that's why they want an on-premise version, where you can just run the application, the plugin on your own servers and do the analysis there instead of externally. So that's what Code Together and Code with Me offer. So you have to pay for that, but then you can have everything internally to prevent your code from going outside. So now we have again two winners, Code Together and Code with Me, because they have the same specs. And this is directly your final score. And we saw that Code with Me has won like the whole tour. Yay! And I think that's valid because Code with Me, for me, it's an excellent tool. It has a lot of functionality, but it's also easy to use and it's convenient that you can just work in IntelliJ. But that's directly the downside. I'm using IntelliJ, so for me it's convenient. If you're not using IntelliJ, then you might not be that happy with having to use it, even though you don't have to really install everything, but still you're usable or you're used to your own preferences. So that's why we also have the jerseys. Oh, or I have jerseys. You don't see them. Okay, I will tell them. It's like more exciting even. We have the jersey, which is about your own IDE. And that one goes to Code Together, because Code Together has the most options to use your own IDE. You have 3 options, and the big ones are in there. So that's the big of the chance. So that's the jersey they get. I'll try to move something. And then the one about continuous collaboration, I think you can all guess, goes to Git Live, because you can use it all day. And if you prefer to have it for that kind of use case, I think it's really well. For the pair programming specific, I would choose another one. But I think for the collaboration, it will be brilliant to have it as an added extra tool. We saw that we have a winner and we have 2 jerseys. So those tools are better for a certain use case probably than the winner. So in the end, it depends. It depends on your preferences, but also if your company already supports one of those tools. Because then it's really easy to use one, because maybe you have already the paid version or you need an on-premise version. So I would like you to start any of those tools. Try them out, use it, because it will make pair programming way easier and way much fun. And because it's more fun, you will do it more often in the end, and I think that's really important. We have the feeling that now COVID is nearly gone, or hopefully, that it's back to normal, but a lot of people enjoyed working remote and it has different benefits. So I'll expect us to work like that way. So we have to also adjust our way of doing things like pair programming to make it work and not just stop doing it. So I encourage you to try one of those tools. And if you try, please let me know what you think of it, because I'm curious which works in which situation. Thank you. Someone has a question? Yeah.
I'm curious if you considered any tools that aren't an IDE plugin or any reason why you chose to focus on using
Yeah. So the question is, if I considered also non-IDE plugins, right? And the funny thing is, I started with that. So in the beginning, also those tools were not that great yet, because I started looking into them 2.5 years ago, like when COVID started. But then I noticed most of those tools, how is it called? First was Screen, then was Pop, something like that. It looks like screen sharing, but it then gives full access to everyone. So I think that now tools like Team also have that, but you can join a session and people can just use whatever tool you are using. But for me, the downside is it gets quite chaotic easily, because as soon as people click on the browser for a second, people don't see the code anymore. It also has some downsides for security, because the tools I used back then, if you give someone control, they can do anything on your laptop, which is of course in the office the same, but then you have to make sure that you know the persons who are joining. But for me, it was like, it didn't felt like working inside an IDE. If someone is using a different IDE, it's less convenient, or if you have the shortcuts. So I did look into them, but in the end I found this really way better, and the other one more difficult. But you can say if you want to use it more like you do in the office, then it's fine, because in the office you also have to work on someone else's machine. But yeah, why not benefit when we have to do it a different way?
And what happens when two people are committing code? Does it go into the machine, or especially with the tool where...
So you mean where the changes go, for example? Yeah, so with all the tools it works that way that if you make changes, they go to the local changes of the host. So also, if in the end of the session you want to commit it, it's the host who has all the changes. And I think it's also a valid decision, because if you would even be able to couple it to the participants, you're working together, so one person edited a line and another person edited a line. So if you're already using the variable used before, you will tear everything apart. So everything goes to the host, yeah. Another question? You can always find me, I will be here today, so if you have any questions, or, yeah, I didn't put it on here, but you can always ask me on Twitter or LinkedIn or somewhere if you have something. Thank you.